This is the Sideways Thinker podcast with me, Caroline Kay. In this series, we're going to explore some of our best known or even least known Bible stories, helping us reconnect to the West's most important foundational texts. Whether you're a seasoned Bible reader or simply Bible curious, join me to rediscover this outrageous literary collection. As Westerners, it is the air that we breathe and the ground upon which we walk, because these are the stories that literally built the West. They have nurtured, amazed, and sustained us. They have brought us right up to this moment, right here, right now. Welcome to Babel for the Bible curious. Episode 5. Come, let us build technology. Welcome back. Before there's a tower, there are bricks, and before there's a plan, there's technology. Sana explains that there's evidence of an awareness of ancient Akkadian techniques, where the making of bricks and inscribing them, which is what they did, was part of a pagan cultural practice. So a version of the Akkadian creation story understands primeval chaos as the time before the existence of bricks, which I think is really interesting. The Akkadian inscriptions frequently even mention bricks. They're really proud of their brick-making ability. But the custom surrounding the formation of the first brick of the cornerstone, it was always accompanied by elaborate ceremonies. This was really something that was, if I dare use the phrase, baked into Akkadian pagan culture. Now, in our modern culture, we might see an equivalent. We might understand, many a young person I'm sure does, we might understand the pre-computerized past as a kind of primeval chaos. A time before the computer is marked as a completely different way of living to the one we have now with the computer. The story of Babel suggests something rather unsettling. Sometimes we build things simply because we can. Bricks come first, and the purpose is second. The technology is driving the project itself. We're doing it in Babel just because we can. There are modern parallels with our phones, artificial intelligence, and various smart systems. And then there's the issue of technocracy, the idea of we know best, unelected, undemocratic political situations where ambition and pride are the driving forces. We have a situation in the modern world where facial recognition and digital surveillance are all becoming part of our lives. Instead of re-evaluating society's morals in the light of secularization, we turn to technological controls. So then people make choices not on the basis of morals, ethics, or conscience, but from fear of state censure and a loss of social credits. Why might God not approve of this sort of thing? Well, perhaps it's because morality ought to be led by conscience and not the fear of human punishment. In this way, humans are acting like God, believing themselves to be as God. And probably this is because the technocratic types do not believe that there is a God. So in this episode, we're going to shift the focus towards technology. We'll have a look at how technology plays the part it does in the actual story of the Tower of Babel. But we'll also consider very carefully how that might impact us in the modern day. In other words, does the story have anything to tell us about the issue of technology and what that might mean to us with completely different technological inventions and paraphernalia to deal with? So we can remind ourselves, a group of unnamed, apparently well-intentioned people set out to build a tower with its top in the heavens. The people involved in the Babel narrative are not named, yet they want to make a name for themselves. They want fame, they want renown. Now this might seem strange, given the Bible's propensity to include a great genealogical list as it does right before this story and immediately after the pericope. Whoever these people are, they are seeking to become renowned, to make a name for themselves. It's written to avoid being scattered all over the world. And the Hebrew, as we've learned, plays with the word for name and place. We've got the Shem and we have Sham. It's telling us, by doing this, that these ideas are interconnected. It seems to me that these people seek to defy the command that God has given just a little bit previously, after the whole Noah episode where half the world or most of the world, apart from Noah and his ark, have been destroyed because of the immorality of the way people lived. We are told that God tells the people who survive, right, you need to go and replenish the earth. And these people are saying, no, we don't want to do that. We want to stay here. We don't want to be scattered all over the world. So we're going to build this monument. We're going to build this city and we're going to stay here. So we're doing it for ourselves. And it is really quite interesting how you can extrapolate from these few words what exactly is going on here. They don't want to move. They don't want to obey God's command. We could say we're in Looking Glass world. It's the wrong way round. It's not as if they say, well, look, we want to build a tower in order to honour God, to worship God. On the contrary, they want to make a name for themselves. Their attention is upon themselves, not focused on a higher source or a higher power or God. It's themselves. We want to make a name for ourselves. And it's not just even that. They don't say it, but their actions really do show that they want to defy what God has asked. God wants humankind to spread around, to fill the earth. And they're saying, no, so that we won't be scattered, we will stay here. Thank you very much. We're going to build a city. We're going to build a tower. It's going to have its top in the heavens. And it's going to give us fame. It's going to make us renowned. Technology in the modern era, we often find ourselves in a similar situation. Often we find that we can do things. Well, we want to do things just because we can. Not out of necessity. It's not like necessity is driving this need to build the city and the tower. Quite the contrary, they get these amazing bricks, this technique of brick making, this hardened material that allows taller, more ambitious building. And that's why they want to do it. They want to do it to show their own power, to show their own ability. They want to replace the natural materials. They've replaced a mountain. They have replaced with their own power, if you like, their own building capabilities. They want to supersede what God has given. And so it's actually deeply meaningful, and it does correspond with a lot of what we're experiencing in the modern time. The use of technology in Babel and in our world suggests a carefully ordered world, one with the necessary organisation and efficiency and desire, if you like, will for man to control everything he grasps. The thing with technology is that it can be exciting, shiny, new. It can feel empowering. You can do so much with technology. It can be amazingly labour-saving, but at the same time, it can be a means of enslaving us. We often do things just because we can in the modern era, and there are important parallels. This desire to control and to make efficient and to dominate results very often in an ever-growing bureaucracy. Now, I'm not saying that Babel is saying anything about bureaucracy as such, but it does imply systematization. In the ancient world, it was the bricks burned hard that symbolized order, building, and culture. The notion of giving order along with the complete anonymity of the people doing the work. They're not named, seen or heard, so they're the ones doing the building, we have to assume. The call to action, we're not told who makes that call to action. And so it is also not just about the ordering of the bricks, it's the ordering of the people. And the ordering means a kind of rationalism. It's a foregrounding of a kind of hyper-rationalism, this idea of measuring and counting. Bricks must be ordered, created, made, counted, carried, and laid in an orderly sequence. Now, we could think about the kind of modern issues of technology in quite different ways, but it's the point about technology driving our own perceptions of ourselves, driving the way we do things, enslaving us, entrapping us in many, many ways. Let's have a think about what technology might mean. I mean, technology can be lots of different things. It could be the pencil you pick up to make a quick scribble or drawing. It could be the computer you use, the phone you have. But it's also things like contraception, social media. Carl Trueman has made some really interesting points here. He thinks that these technological improvements, if you like, contraception in particular, and social media combined, it has tended to detach sex from reproduction and then identity away from community. So people are not necessarily connected with the people in their immediate vicinity, but they are connected with people online that might not be anywhere near where they are. And popular culture celebrates this idea of the autonomous self and the idea of self-expression as the ultimate good. And then politics transforms these identities and these technological inventions into rights and claims. The idea of recognition replaces virtue or duty as the higher public good. So our world prizes visibility and validation more than truth or tradition. So social media turns identity into performance. Psychological well-being becomes moral authority, the idea that I have a truth that replaces the truth, my truth, your truth, his truth, and so on. So he's arguing about the psychological self as a social reality and individual identity in terms of something one wants to control for oneself, this lack of understanding of the self as a social person, a social context. This is gone, and it's what I choose to be, how I curate myself through technology. And it's almost like this ordering and anonymity in the Babel story. The people themselves are anonymous, and we know that. We're just told that these are unnamed people who want to make a name for themselves. And this is what happens in the modern world. People pick up the phone and they want to make a name for themselves. They curate themselves as a kind of spectacle to be looked at, a spectacle to be watched, to perform one's identity rather than to just simply live with others in a relationship. I want to talk about Roger Scruton's work on the human face. And the book's central argument is that the human face is not just a biological object. The human face is where we first encounter another person as a subject rather than an object. And so, going back to my previous comments that Carl Trueman is trying to warn us about, what's happening with social media is that we seem to be turning ourselves into objects to be seen, objects to be kind of viewed as if we're always performing. And Roger Scruton is saying, no, you're not an object. A human being is not an object. A human being is a subject, a person. He says when we look into someone's face, we are not simply observing flesh, muscles, and neurons. We experience another I looking back at us. I as in the subjective I. So the face reveals our personhood, our distinctive humanity, if you like. So he says, look, we can understand human beings in different ways. You've got a scientific perspective that sees the face as an arrangement of tissues, nerves, and muscles. But the personal perspective sees the face as an expression of a conscious self. Now, both of these descriptions are correct in a way, but Scruton argues that they belong to different levels of explanation. Neuroscience can explain how a smile is produced, but it cannot explain what the smile means within a relationship. So for Roger Scruton, the face is where personhood becomes visible, and this I-you encounter becomes possible. Roger Scruton is influenced by Martin Buber, who talks about this I, it, and I, thou in terms of relationships. So Scruton is saying that modern society often encourages us to treat people as its objects to use, measure, or manipulate. Much of Roger Scruton's book is an argument against what he calls reductionism. So he's not denying biology. What he says is that biology alone cannot account for responsibility, freedom, dignity, love, beauty, and worship. And the face becomes an example of how we understand these things, how we understand the relationships between one person and another. A physiologist can describe every muscle in a mother's smile, but that description leaves out the very thing we actually perceive, and that is love. Roger Scruton argues that every face represents an irreducible person who addresses us as you. And a totalizing political system will erase individuality by treating people as interchangeable units rather than unique persons. And you can see this sort of thing happening in a technocratic society. There is a sense that the elites that kind of rule over us now are not really accountable and do not see us as individuals. They do not like the idea, for example, of the nation state, this idea of sovereignty, and that translates into individual sovereignty. And so we're not interchangeable units, we're unique people. And those of us who do believe in God see ourselves as made in the image of God. And that's why God, even as a character within the story, is actually really important. You are made in that image of God, and that gives you and your existence meaning. It gives your face meaning when you encounter another human being also made in the image of God. And these themes actually connect rather interestingly with the story of Babel. I suppose there is an emerging argument coming through the podcast that human flourishing depends on plurality and genuine dialogue rather than enforced uniformity. And we've talked about this, how the anonymity of the people is reflected in the sort of repetition of the words and the sounds of the Hebrew and the actual building and the bricks and the hugeness of the project and how it would be managed and how it might even possibly be forced upon people. So my reading is about preserving and encouraging different voices. I'm arguing that God wants plurality, which is why he introduces this notion of different languages, because once you have different languages, translation always becomes an issue. It's never perfect. And so the story of Babel itself, being written in Hebrew, is itself an issue of translation. So it's kind of a very postmodern almost experience to try and take this story apart. So one of the things we've established a little bit along the way in our series is that the attempt on the part of the anonymous builders, the Babel people, is not just that they want to meet God. They don't really say, we want to build this tower in order to encounter the one true God and pay homage to him. That's not what's said. What they're trying to do is replace the natural world with their inventions, the bricks and the bitumen, and the mountain being replaced by the tower. They want to play God. They want to be the all-powerful creator. And every time man tries to play God, there's always suffering. Now, there really is a push on the part of global organisations such as the World Economic Forum, the World Health Organization, the United Nations, and other global entities. They actually are working towards a situation where they will end up joining up into one world government. And these elites are not people that you elect and discuss with. You have not chosen this. It's pretty clear that there is no place for God in their plans. Yuval Noah Harari, who has spoken a lot about augmentation of human beings, has made his godless non-philosophy very explicit. He is always writing in a completely presumptuous, godless context. And we could say that Harari doesn't exactly believe in a godless world. He's not chosen to acknowledge the spiritual God of the Bible. Harari's God is the man-made pagan god of the elites, which naturally enough turns out to be technology suffused with an ideology, a kind of ideolatry, if you like. Their vision is a compulsorily technologically augmented future which will be imposed upon people. And like the people in the Babel story, it's being done just because they can. In the Babel story, before God mirrors the people's speech, he intervenes before the tower is completed. If, as one people with one language for all, this is how they have begun to act, then nothing that they propose to do will be out of their reach. And we have been warned. Nothing that they propose to do will be out of their reach. In this episode, we considered how the technology was the driver of the Babel project. We know this because the bricks are mentioned first before the idea to build a city or a tower. It's a small observation. However, this kind of word order tends to indicate something in biblical studies. The technique of baking bricks with this degree of hardness meant all kinds of structures had now become possible. We tend to presume that the Tower of Babel refers to the Babylonian ziggurat, which is a kind of multi-stage temple. And scholars are in broad agreement that the Tower of Babel story was inspired by a real Mesopotamian structure, the Etemenenki, a massive ziggurat dedicated to the god Marduk in ancient Babylon. This is based on strong linguistic, geographical, and historical evidence. The name, the biblical Hebrew word Babel or Bavel, comes from the Akkadian Babilim, meaning gate of the gods, which we've already mentioned. And the location, which also we've mentioned, the biblical text places the tower in the land of Shinar, which is the historical term for southern Mesopotamia, where Babylon was located. On the various tower descriptions, ziggurats were massive stepped temple towers that ancient Mesopotamians built to reach the heavens. Etemenenki was the most famous and largest ziggurat in Babylon. And of course, this ruin effect. The Hebrew word for Babylon, Bavel, sounds very similar to Balal, which we've covered as well, the Hebrew word for confusion. Interestingly, there's a Sumerian myth about Enmerkar that also features a language crisis. The Sumerian myth is an ancient epic poem entitled Enmerkar and the Lord of Aratar, which dates back to the 21st century BCE. It contains a passage famously known to historians as the Speech of Enki, which serves as the earliest known parallel to the biblical Tower of Babel story. And of course, this story links a language crisis directly to a massive temple building project. These various connections with other stories add an interesting flavour to biblical studies because you can see how things have cross-pollinated across different cultures and how the biblical versions tend to deliver quite a unique take on a lot of these stories. They tend to run them through a more ethical framework. So we have a man-made imitation of a mountain born of human hard labour and suffering. Remember how the story begins. Everyone has the same language and uses the same words. And we live in a time when slogans are repeated in lieu of argument and debate. The man-made replacements for natural materials and a monument to man's own abilities are regarded as idolatrous. And idolatry here is not merely the worship of false pagan gods, it's the turning away from God. It is making oneself into a god-like entity. And it is, above all, the using of other human beings, corralled into a collective to do your bidding in a mass exercise of power and likely cruelty. Recall that Nimrod is explicitly mentioned in the lead-up to the story. We've learned how God deals with the idolatry of Babel. He breaks up the collective, which hinges on a uniformity of language, and we can see parallels today. Who has not noticed the current attempt to corral us into one worldview, with only the most superficial chimeras of diversity foregrounded? Words are redefined and even disappeared. Language, and thus thought, is strictly policed. God says, if as one people, with one language for all, this is how they have begun to act, then nothing that they propose to do will be out of their reach. And we have been warned. Nothing that they propose to do will be out of their reach. The question arises, do we sit passively and hope that God will intervene? Believer or non-believer, are we not obliged to act? In the next episode, we're going to consider the symbolism of those bricks and consider further the issue of enslavement and what it means. And we will begin to make those links with the Exodus story. So, until then, bye for now. Thank you so much for listening. This has been the Sideways Thinker podcast with the Babel series for the Bible curious. Written and produced by me, Caroline Kay. Music is Stars and Laurels by Shane Ivers for Silverman Sounds. If you enjoyed this podcast, and I really hope you did, please like and subscribe and share on the usual platforms. Thank you so much.